welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another book review for you, and that is for A Time to Kill by John Grisham. This is the first of John Grisham's Jake Brigance novels, and one of the first books of his, I think, that he wrote, and is my first of his books that I have read. This book I got some months ago, and I was really looking forward to because my friend Jonathan Cohn, as well as a few other friends of mine, really like John Grisham, especially this book in particular. And I know he's a very popular author that a lot of people like and things like that, so I figured I would give this book a shot, see if I like it. It's very different from my usual. I'm not one that usually reads like legal thrillers or courtroom dramas or whatever you would classify this book as, but I figured I'd give it a shot and try it for something a little different. And I was very pleasantly surprised because I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I expected to. I thought I would probably like it because I had heard so many good things about it, so I figured I'd read it and be like, yeah, that was good, but I didn't expect that I would love this book, which I think I really did. So to get started talking about the positives of this book, of which there are many things, first of all, I think the premise for this book is very interesting. Now, the premise for this book, the way I'm going to discuss it, is something that I was not aware of when I first read this book, so if you don't want to know anything about this book going in, then sorry, but I feel like I can't talk about the premise for this book without spoiling what that premise is. So essentially you have, it's set in, I think it's Missouri, I can't remember, but basically this community where there are a lot of racial tensions going on. A young black girl, I think around 10 years old, is assaulted by two young white men, and then afterwards they are imprisoned and they're set to go to trial to determine whether or not they should get the death penalty or whatever. And the father of the girl who was assaulted decides to take the law into his own hands and kills these two young men immediately after one of their hearings. And you have Jake Brigance, who is the lawyer in this book and the main character, who is assigned to the father, whose name is Carl Lee Haley, and he is assigned to him as his defense lawyer in order to prove his innocence and make sure that he does not get sent to get the death penalty. I think that's just a very interesting premise for all kinds of reasons, which kind of leads into another positive of this book, which to me is the biggest thing that I liked about this book, which is the themes and the way that this book made me think. So there's a lot of racial themes, white people, black people, which of course in the United States is a huge thing with a lot of history to it, and this book draws on that very heavily. It also has themes about the death penalty, though not to a severe degree, in itself, but more so talking about, does this person deserve it? And it doesn't really go one way or the other, really presenting, I don't feel like John Grisham was really kind of giving his opinion in this book. It was presented in a way that felt like it was just, here's both sides of the argument, and we'll just see how things go. And I think that was very interesting, and it presented a very morally gray area, I think, where as is the case for many of the characters in this book, and I would say myself included, you get where Carl Lee Haley is coming from by wanting to more or less get back at these people who hurt his daughter, but it's also does he deserve to take the law into his own hands? Not necessarily. So it's a very interesting concept, and really made me think a lot, made me really kind of look into a lot of the stuff that was going on, and be like, okay, this person makes a good point, but this person makes a good counterpoint, and it was just very interesting, and I think very well balanced in terms of handling each side of the argument. I also think that the actual story and the plot of this book was interesting. There was a lot of really interesting stuff going on, even things that I didn't think would be exciting, like the part towards the end when they're actually in the courtroom was extremely interesting to me, even though I thought it would be quite boring. And just the events surrounding all of this, of course, this is a very controversial case, and so you have a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and that all is going on. A lot of interesting stuff happens to Jake, to Carl Lee Haley, to people around Jake, all kinds of things. it becomes a very big deal, and a lot of really interesting things going on around it. I also really enjoyed a lot of the character interactions. I'll talk more about the characters in a few minutes, but I think the character interactions were really well done. They are all like feel natural, feel like people, and there was actually quite a few times where I laughed out loud reading this book, because there was just some very humorous lines given by the characters and things like that. A lot of really kind of funny moments throughout this book, because even though this book is very serious and dark in a lot of ways, there's plenty of like small moments of levity that I really enjoyed as well. And that pretty much, I think, sums up most of my positive thoughts on this book. The big thing for me was the themes and just the premise of the book in general, which I just thought was amazing, and I also just really enjoyed reading this book. I always looked forward to reading more of it, which I think is a really important thing. As for negatives, I do have a couple of things, which are not massive problems, but they are things that I still want to mention. First things first, I feel like the book could have maybe been trimmed down a little bit. There's some parts which make sense, such as in the courtroom where things are repeated over and over and over again, which makes sense because that's probably how things would actually go. It just kind of, after the first or second time, I was like, okay, I get it, you can move on now. But that's obviously just not how things really would go in this situation. And in general, like, it felt like it could have maybe been trimmed a little bit, but not too much. I think this book, generally, like, the pacing's good and things like that. It's just, would have liked to maybe see a few of those parts that felt maybe a little bit unnecessary not being there, but it's not a huge issue. The other thing for me is the characters, which I know I just said I really enjoyed their interactions, and I did, but I do think that there were not a lot of characters in here that were super duper memorable. I think that Jake is a decently memorable character. I think Harley Haley is a decently memorable character. I think that the judge and the other lawyer involved and some of Jake's friends are all, decently memorable, but none of them are like amazing characters. And I will also say that this is a thing that I'm like conflicted on, is how much I liked the characters as well, because even though I found a lot of the characters to be enjoyable on the page and I enjoyed their interactions with one another, well done and everything, but I didn't find them super likable, including Jake Briggins himself, who, considering he's the main character and I didn't like him at some points, that to me is a little bit of a negative, although I feel like it portrays these characters in a very real and authentic way, so it makes sense. Not everybody is going to be like a good person and that's like the end. Like, they're very complicated. They have good parts, bad parts to them, all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense. It feels authentic. It feels realistic. It's just not personally maybe what I would have liked to see. I didn't feel like there were any characters that were adequately likable that I was like, oh, I love this character. They were all just kind of like, nobody here really feels like a good person, at least, in a way that I really connected with. But other than that, I did really enjoy this book, and those couple issues were just small little things that were not huge problems for me. So overall, I really enjoyed reading this book. I had a great time with it, and I thought it was very thought-provoking, very interesting, and a lot of fun to read, and I was always excited to read more of it. And despite those few little issues here and there, I did really enjoy this book. Also, one thing before I have my final thoughts here, I do just want to say that the book does have copious use of the N-word, which I also was not a huge fan of, but it's, again, authentic to real life, I guess, especially in this setting. But if that's something that's going to bother you, then maybe don't read this. But that's something that put me off at first, but over time I was like, okay, this is how the characters are. I can deal with that. So overall, really enjoyed it though. As far as a rating out of 10 that I would give this book, I'd actually give it a 9.5 out of 10, which is way higher than I thought it would be. Going into this, I thought like 7 or 8 maybe is where I'd land, but did not expect it to be as high as I would put it now that I finished it. But I really enjoyed this book a lot, had a great time with it, and really enjoyed it. And I may read more John Grisham in the future. We'll see. This is not the kind of thing that I will probably go super out of my way to read. Like I might pick up one of his books, like if it's one that I've heard's good and it's cheap and stuff like that. It probably won't be something that I'm like, oh, I need to go get all the John Grisham books. despite the fact that I really enjoyed this one. But my tastes tend to lead more like fantasy, sci-fi, horror, the kind of thing I usually go for on this channel. But I may read more John Grisham in the future. We'll see. If you have read any of his books and there are any that you think I'd particularly enjoy, leave them in the comments. So that's pretty much it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you have read A Time to Kill and what you thought of it, if so. And once again, like I just said, if you have any recommendations for more of his books you think I'd enjoy, leave those as well. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.